Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Sloppy Lab. This is Bottom of the Beaker, the weekly show about the design, ducks, and strategy of Keyforge. That's everyone, and I mean everyone's favorite unique deck game. I am JT Russell, the Lighthouse Doc, and with me tonight is a man who will play his Martian Generosity with 2 amber in his pool, and then the next time you look at him, you'll see 20 cards in his grip. You say, what's going on here? He'll give you a smirk and say, the hand is quicker than the eye, my friend. I am, of course, talking about Quick Draw. That's Quick Draw 3457 to be precise. How we doing this evening, Quick Draw?
I'm good. Is the reason that I have 20 cards because I always skip 6? 2 amber, play the generosity. I would get 6, but I'm like, that's not enough. That's not good.
Not enough. I think you just kind of keep drawing real fast and then people don't notice.
Also
You're just
that.
like,
Also that.
sound effects required.
Weirdly, I have like no generosity decks that I like. But
Mhm.
I rarely play that card. It's kind of weird. Great card. Nothing against it.
There's a league going on in the KF NK. Oh man, I'm so bad with these acronyms. It's like I just start off one, and then my brain's like, "You mean the other one?" No, I mean the NKFL server called I Am Legion. I think not tonight's playing in it, but the shtick is that you have to play decks that have double rares or triple uncommons or quad commons or more, right? And I was like scrolling through my double rare decks, and I was like, "Oh, I have a double generosity deck. That's pretty fun." But not playing in the league, but you made me think of it.
I think when that league was announced, I was kind of like, yeah, you just play double generosity decks and you win, right?
That'd be my plan. Although I'd be between so I have double generosity, which is a lot of fun, and then I've got for me, and then I've got double bottomless depths GR Wadka deck, which is also kind of like, okay, we can
Hmm,
do this. I guess it could be a thing. Uh, Not to mention Brickblade double punk. What's not to like?
that's a good
So
one. Yeah.
there are some spicy options. Some spicy
Nice.
options. But no, not doing that one. Not doing that one. Um, but anyway, speaking of special cards, before we get into the goodness that we have in store for y'all this evening's episode, evening for us, a little bit of a teaser. A little bit of a teaser that won't come as a surprise to folks who are keeping their ear to the ground, folks who are circling the old watering hole of the Keyforge content of late. Yeah, I guess for the folks headed to KFC and some to follow too, there is a fun little, what would you call it? A treat that's been put together by the Bad Penny Press folks, and they're calling it the Content Creator Card. Man, there's like a word that I'm just like blanking on. I'm like stumbling over it. You're letting me just smirking. I'm
I'm
sure.
enjoying every second of this. Yeah.
Uh, yeah, I
I
got
don't know the
nothing.
word
There's
either.
okay. Hey, Zock's in the chat. Zock can probably help us out. The content creator card project. I don't know. Anyway, this is very cool. Very excited. So the BPP folks have put together a group of, I believe, 10 content creators who will have a presence at KFC. They all got together and individually designed a fun card that represents their brand, and they will have some of these cards on hand courtesy of the Bad Penny Press folks at KFC to give away in their own creative and unique ways. So we'll have some on hand to give out and distribute in what I'm sure will be a creative and unique way.
If you want more info, we're not going to be the ones to spill the beans, but you should listen to the recent From Future Self episode where Dead Sync will go give some more details, not sharing everything. The one thing I think that is important to note is like, yes, this will be at KFC. We can share some stuff. But if you're not going to KFC, don't worry. There's still ways to get your hands on it. Listen to Help from Future Self's recent episode with Dead Sync, get more details, or best case, just come to KFC and talk to us directly.
Do you got any fun little teasers you want to throw out? Quick draw? Anything?
I don't remember all of the things that I am allowed to say and not allowed to say, so I'm not going to tease anything. But it's really cool. It's really exciting. Huge props to the Bad Printing Press folks. They are very rad, and this is a really cool idea, and it's a great way. Like what I love about this KFC, how it's shaping up, is that both from Ghost Galaxy and from a lot of content creators, they're making it a real celebration this year. It's not like just a tournament. It's going to be so much stuff that's like tons of fun. I went to KFC last year. It was my first one. Really excited for this year. It's going to be even better. That's just the honest truth. Like, there's just a lot of people doing a great job of making this a really fun event that is more than just about playing games, but celebrating, all the community. Some really cool exclusive things happening. So I'm very excited for it.
Just to tickle the fancies out there, I don't think folks will be terribly surprised at our. Well, I don't think they'll guess what our card does, but I think they'll look at it and say, "Oh, that makes sense."
They'll never guess it. This is the exact opposite of what anyone would expect.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. Well, if Daniel Day-Lewis were teasing this card, he would say there will be ducks, I guess.
I like it.
Yes. Okay. And Zoc in the chat saying huge props to Dead Sync. Yes, major props. I will say underscore that huge props to Dead Sync. Working with him on this project was it was great experience, handled very well, and I think that I'm super super pumped with how our card came out. So looking forward to
Me
sharing
too.
that with folks. Indeed. Well, with that having been said, nice little past participle subjunctive. Two of those are correct. One is a lie. Yeah, what are we talking about this evening? We've got a fun one in store. What's our topic, Quick Draw?
Yeah, so this evening we are going to be talking about when to adapt your plans, or put another way, how to avoid tunneling or tunnel vision. You came up with well, I'm going to say this was your idea for this topic. You had some very thorough details added here. I'll let you kind of define what you're looking at with this type of conversation.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so I wanted to talk through this after having talked to a few folks after some of my games, and they said, "Oh, you were kind of tunneling here and like missed some things, right?" And that kind of prompted me like, "Oh, maybe this is a thing that's worth thinking about a little bit more." And so for this evening, I wanted to start with seeing if we can kind of feel good with our definition of tunneling, what it means, and then kind of we're gonna go from there. We're gonna talk a little bit about where some folks might might motivate tunneling for some folks. So we're gonna get into a little bit of like psychographics, and then touch on some other ideas that have been raised in past episodes. From there, yeah, how to recognize when you might be doing it, and then even some little tips and tricks on how you can avoid doing it yourself. So it's not this is going to be a process of exploration for all of us, certainly, but I think we'll have some good stuff to get through. Cool.
Do
So
you want to start with some examples, kind of like share maybe a recent $1 billion plan, $5 blunder, or do you want to save that for later? Kind of like talk about some real world or real crucible examples, so to speak, of
yeah, yeah,
situations where
yeah,
you might be tunneling.
totally. So let me put kind of the definition out there. I think folks will probably get the visual and understand or intuit what we mean, but to have sort of a concrete definition, I'd say that you are tunneling when you have sort of a plan or strategy in mind, and you focus in on that to the exclusion of other options. And whether or not it ends up being the correct thing to do, you maybe are not considering other routes or options that you might exercise, and just kind of plow ahead on what you had kind of initially identified as the thing you want to do. So I am going to give you an example. Yes, $1 billion plan, $5 blunder from a match this week playing with Not Tonight. Actually, I have a very cool deck that I will pull up for the fine folks with us on stream. It is called Viator, the Interrogators Caves, and there are ample opportunities to kind of tunnel with it when playing this deck. Right off the bat, it's got a beanstalk and a healthy number of giants. So I've played an awful lot of games where I get the beanstalk early, and then I just kind of call Brobner for a while and then lose. And the hypothesis there, or the idea there, is there was probably a point when I should have recognized that just continuing to call Brobner and do the beanstalk thing was not a winning plan, and adapted my plan and moved on to something else. But for our blunder specifically, this deck also features a Missile Officer Myers and a Look What I Found. So we've been talking a little bit on a few discords about how the rule of six woefully does not apply to scrap effects and discarding cards. So with these two cards, right, you can discard Missile Officer Myers, use its scrap effect to discard another card from your hand and resolve its play effect. So that other card you want to be Look What I Found, which has Omega, but the Omega is not part of its play effect, so that matters not in this case. You just get to resolve the play effect of Look What I Found, which says return one card of each type, action, artifact, creature, upgrade from your discard pile to your hand. Well, the creature is going to be Missile Officer Myers. The action is going to be Look What I Found, since it's in your discard pile at the moment. And then you bring back an upgrade and an artifact kind of as profit. And you kind of repeat that at your leisure as often as you like, because the scrap effect doesn't care about the rule of 6, so you just kind of keep doing it. And if you've got an upgrade that you can discard on your Star Alliance turn, or an artifact for profit, then you can do some really, really fun things. With this deck, I say, hey, that's a pretty cool combo. I can't do anything broken with it, like really, really silly. I can discard an Essence Entangler, which is a Star Alliance upgrade, as many times as I want on each loop, or once per loop of this combo, and move an amber around, right? Essence Entangler has a scrap effect, move one amber from a creature to another creature. That's pretty cool. I can stack up all the amber on one creature, then actually play the Essence Entangler on that creature to kill it and claim the amber. Pretty fun. So when I think about this combo and think about this deck, that's the thing I think about. And I was playing a game with Not Tonight. She was on check for key 3. There was some amber on board. I did the moving amber thing around, and I was thinking to myself, okay, I've lost the game, but I'm going to do my cool thing. And I was doing the cool thing, moving amber around, maybe killed a creature. I can't remember. And then passed the turn maybe and lost. And I said, oh, it's too bad, but at least I did my fun thing. And then sat there for like half a heartbeat and realized, oh no, there was in my discard pile a Memorialize the Fallen, right? And so I should have at some point just said, okay, I'm not taking back Look What I Found. I'm going to take back the Memorialize the Fallen, discard the Missile Officer Myers, and resolve the player effect of Memorialize the Fallen and take her off check, and then live to fight another day. And this was me just being in sort of like on mental rails, thinking about this combo and how I typically use these cards, and not even seeing that there was this other option, because in my mind I've kind of like gelled these things together as this like one cool thing that I do, and then not really even thinking about it as this like toolbox. So that was me tunneling in on how I typically use these particular cards, and not like looking outside of that narrow field of vision. That's what my other options were.
It's funny. This combo is like a poor man's version of Missile Officer Myers in Multidimensional Rescue.
Yeah.
You don't get the out of house play effect, so like maybe for that reason you're just thinking like, oh, I can't play the Memorialize, so I'm not going to take it. Not realizing that the whole way to trigger that combo is just scrapping Myers and scrapping an out of house card. So yes, you definitely. I didn't notice it either, though. To be fair, like I was watching that game. I never saw that line. I was fascinated by that game because it just felt like you were so close, but you couldn't quite get there, and then not even realizing like, yeah, you could have extended the game for another probably 3 turns at that point, kind of resetting everyone's amber. But interesting blunder. I mean, like I said, I didn't catch it, but you clearly, yeah, like you're in the situation where you're focused on a certain game plan or a certain thing that you're used to doing, maybe a certain style of play, and you just kind of missed what your actual out was because you're so fixated on that. I have a few decks. Like the one example that I think of most often for me is a deck with Dataforge in Dark Tidings. So, like I have a couple decks with Dataforge and Dark Tidings, and they have multiple game plans. One of the game plans could be building up your archives for a Dataforge turn. But depending on when you draw the certain archiving cards, you may not get the archiving early enough to be able to pull off the Dataforge. So if you're so fixated on the Dataforge, you might not realize that just building a board and reaping out is actually the right way to play. And you could be tunneling on that Dataforge play, even though it's futile and you've already like not been able to archive enough pieces for it. And so you sort of fixate on the wrong play and you tunnel on it. And you need to recognize those situations to be able to adapt and switch your game plan to something that's going to get you closer to your win condition.
Totally. That's a great example. I had 2 other kind of examples that I just wanted to throw out there. 2 decks that I played an awful lot. So there's T Zyger, the Lighthouse Dock, one of my absolute favorite decks. I'm sure folks who have listened to any of our stuff before have heard me mention this deck. So this is you, Mom. I'm talking to you. Very, very fun interaction that this deck features. It has an animator. It has a transporter platform, and it has an Ultra Gravitron that also includes a draw pip and a capture pip. So you can, on a Logos turn, animate your transporter platform, play out the Ultra Gravitron, capture onto the animated transporter platform very fun, very cheeky, and then bounce the transporter, bounce the gravitron back to hand, replay it, get another capture, get another draw, get another 5 archives. Ooh, mama, this is a lot of fun to do.
You clearly like the complicated decks. These examples you're giving are extremely intricate niche cases. That's not to say that this concept is not relatable to less complex decks. Like I said, like just a simple data forge is something for me that like,
Hmm.
there's so many things in your decks that could do it, but this just says more about JT's style here, I think.
I will admit to it, and that's foreshadowing, maybe foreshadowing some of the psychographic pieces as well. But yeah, this is sort of a convoluted, not a very common sort of scenario, but it's a very strong end game that this deck is capable of. It has some tools that can help you get to that end game, right? It's got an Eaton's Jar, it's got a couple Infernus, and so you can spend your early mid games trying to shut down some of the tools that the other deck has for interacting with your end game, right?
Hmm.
So I can use my jar to turn off your artifact control, right? I can use my Infernuses to make sure that you don't have things like scoop up or what have you to deal with the gravitron if it has to stay on board, right? So getting to that end game and warping my early game around it can be a little bit of a trap, right? A little bit of a trap because there are definitely games where I'm just better off playing T Zyger as a mid-rangey value deck, right? It's got Kirby's, it can spam out Kirby's, it can play a Professor Torado on an off turn and get a bunch of reaps with ready mutants. It's got a lot of other things going on, but I enjoy that end game so much that I like push for it.
So it's more about your affinity for a certain deck or style that kind of pushes you towards tunneling in this certain strategy, right? Rather than just being like, I can just easily reap out with logos here and purge your creature and move on and do it again next turn and win the game,
Right,
right?
right. And my love for grindy decks in particular, right? Like
Mm.
I think about this deck as one that's going to extend the game and I'm going to win on turn, 15, 16. And there are definitely games where I'm like, no, I should be thinking that I'm going to try and rush a little bit, make a big board and reap out
Yeah.
as opposed to being a little bit more reactive in my play.
Funny anecdote for me is that at last year's KFC at the Last Chance qualifier, I was lucky enough to open up a really spicy Whirlpool deck. And two things where I, like in hindsight, I think I was definitely tunneling. And not really. Well, I mean, I guess it's a slightly different type of tunneling. So we're talking in your case with Zyger about your affinity, kind of pushing you towards making those same plays that kind of lean into your affinity and what you enjoy about it. I kind of went the other way. So when I opened the Whirlpool deck, I actually swapped out the Saurian pod that it came with for a Mars pod, just because I was looking for more creature control. But the Saurian pod actually had great synergy with the Whirlpool, and I didn't quite lean into my affinity of the Whirlpool enough, so I ended up playing with the Whirlpool pod, but with not as much capture. So when I'm in these games throughout the Last Chance qualifier, it's not in my nature to discard a Whirlpool, and so I like fixated on the Whirlpool play so much that there were many games where I was like, this is probably not a good plan, but I'm just going to play it anyway, and it always came back to bite me. So I was sort of tunneling on that Whirlpool strategy and not just playing this like a straight up value deck. But on the other side of the coin, like during the Forging an Alliance step, I very much could have leaned more into it. I kind of tunneled on like needing creature control and sealed, not trying to like recognize some of the value and synergy that my deck itself had. So it's interesting because I think that we can also think of this concept of tunneling not just in your in-game play, but if you're playing in Alliance or Sealed Alliance and kind of tunneling on your affinity, like trying to build something that you're going to be comfortable with playing. Like it's a deck you in Sealed, it's a deck you've never played before, or an Alliance you've never played before. So like focusing on what you are interested in playing and familiar with playing, I think is a really good advantage. And in addition, if you're playing Archon or another format, even just like sometimes it's a tough decision to decide like which deck you want to bring. Sometimes you're like, oh, I'm so worried about like Winds of Death Key Abduction. I need to bring a counter to that. But you can bring something that's not really in your wheelhouse as far as your skill set and your affinity and what you like playing. Sometimes you just need to lean into like what you are comfortable with and enjoy about the game, and that may end up being like the best decision for you competitively as well.
Yeah, I love bringing this back to kind of Aurora's concept of affinity, and I think one of the ways that maybe, yeah, maybe you can combat your a tendency to two tunnel is to bring decks that you have an affinity for, and that's just kind of a way of saying like, yeah, my intuition is going to naturally lead me down some of these stronger pathways. I think you still going to want to have the ability to recognize when you're tunneling in game, but it can absolutely be a factor in deck selection too. Like I know that I look at a deck and I'll say, maybe not write it off, maybe write it off, but just say, oh, the stat isn't kind of where I'd like it to be for what I'd consider an Archon deck, and not give it as many reps as I should before kind of relegating it to the maybe not an Archon candidate bin.
We're talking about so many other concepts. This was also stuck out to me in the preparation for this episode, and some of the things that you were kind of bringing up as points here. The affinity was one thing that we've talked about with Aurora, which I found really interesting that that's playing in here. Empathy with Astron was one that was really obvious to me. Like when you're tunneling on your own kind of play, like you talked about your example of like playing Beanstalk and just playing a bunch of Brobnar and just hoping to reap out and win the game that way. You may not have had enough empathy for what your opponent's deck was capable of doing to say that, like, yeah, they're just going to be able to handle this, or they're going to be able to handle my burst from Brobnar, and then I'm not going to have time to dig. So, like, empathy is a huge part of this too, and understanding what your opponent's deck's capable of to know if you need to switch your game plan. So it just kind of was interesting to me that this concept of tunneling sort of building off of a lot of the past topics that we've had, especially topics with some other great guests on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's just kind of jump right into this kind of category. Signs you might be tunneling. Absolutely. If you find yourself being surprised by your opponent's play a lot, it could be a sign that you're fixating on things that are kind of shutting off your awareness of the like larger game, right? So if you're being surprised often by your opponent's play, it might mean that you're not in tune. You need to work on that sense of empathy, or you're just kind of like fixating on these individual elements and not seeing the broader picture. Ignoring your opponent's board is a big one as well. If you find yourself just playing out turns but ignoring your opponent's board, and missing onboard tricks, especially missing onboard tricks, everybody's going to miss tricks out of hands from time to time, sure, but if you're missing onboard tricks, that's likely a sign that you're tunneling a little bit.
And then you had a third sign that you might be tunneling. I like these signs. This is a really interesting exercise because, like, as you're in a game, you can start to use these like sort of signals and recognize this. So these are really interesting to me to bring these up as warning signs, so to speak.
And the last one you're referencing here is falling into kind of repetitive play patterns, right? So if you find yourself, and like myself with Zygar, and like myself with Blom, which is the third deck I'm gonna reference here too, if you find yourself falling into repetitive play patterns, it could just be a sign that you have a fairly linear deck, but it's also potentially a sign that you're tunneling in on how you should be playing that deck, or how you could be playing that deck. I think "should" is the word that's tunneling indicative there, right? But if you find yourself falling into repetitive play patterns, that could be a sign as well. The deck I mentioned there, Blom of Tritrix, which I'm trying out calling it Tritrix instead of Blom, but Blom's kind of maybe stuck a little bit. I don't know. Tritrix just tickles my fancy. This deck, it's an 83 SAS Grim Reminders deck. It features the Witching Hour and a Witch Queen. It's got 3 other witches, Witch of the Eye, Witch of the Spore, and Chota. It also has a Perilous Wild, so it can bounce a witch while they're elusive, and is capable of making a couple keys a turn if you start with a few amber all ready to go. It's a very, very spicy Grim Reminders deck, capable of doing very potent, if a bit solitary, untamed things. It's also got some Geistoid, Milling, and Recursion to set up those combos, right? So you've got the Boo, you've got a couple Holiday Festivals, you got in here somewhere, and there is a playbook that you can follow with this deck, which is let me YOLO out my recursion, or my self mill cards. Hope that I did not mill all of my recursion. Play out the one recursion piece that gets the chain started, and then start looping Chotas to close out the game before it's too late. And I've been playing this deck a fair bit, and have found that with that game plan, I'm usually winning on turn 6 or 7, like 80% of the time, and then that other 20%, the deck is just kind of like, it's like, what were you doing, dude? You just put cards in your discard pile all game, and then nothing happened. But like I got into a habit of like, that's how I played this deck. But it's still like, I mean, you look at the Brobnar, it comes in rated as a 26 by SAS. I mean, there's stuff that it does. It's got a Brick Nasty. It's got a few down to size. Got a lot of pips. Like, this could get played, and probably should get played some of the time, as a sort of value deck that has the potential to win with a walk-off Chota.
Mm.
And that's a bias of mine that I have a lot of time breaking. Like when I sit down to play this deck, I'm like, all right, I'm all in on the like end game witch loops. And if you have a Infernus, it's like, oh boy, like how am I gonna make this happen? Actually, one of the first non-event matches. So I opened this deck in a store champ sealed. It did the Chota and Ecto Charge things all day. I think it won all of its games and didn't forge any natural keys.
That was back when Ecto Charge could force for free, right?
I think so. I can't quite remember.
Mm.
But after the event, I played a friendly with John, second act, and he was piloting Nova's deck,
Mm.
which I'm right now drawing a blank
Jacques.
on. Jacques, thank you. Yes, which has a couple Infernus, and it was like turn 2, and my Witch Queen got purged. And I was like, all right, well, that's going to be rough. We played it out, and it still ended up being a close game. And
Mm.
like, that should have been a decent sign to me that this deck can still do things.
Yeah, it has enough value in it at least that if you need to go to a backup plan, it still like might be able to get you across the finish line.
Totally. And I very, very rarely look to exercise those backup plans. So when
Hmm.
I find myself in situations where, or let me phrase it a different way, very likely found myself in situations where I should reach for the backup plan, but instead try to force plan A.
Yeah, and if you stick with plan A for too long, it might be too late by the time you realize your plan A is not going to work. I think you had made a good analogy where you're in the tunnel, and if you can see the train heading at you inside the tunnel, that means you've been tunneling for too long, right? Like you need to get out of the tunnel before the train comes, and if you can't get out of that tunnel, that means that you need to switch your game plan.
I don't know if I made that. I'll take credit for it, but I like it a lot.
I saw it somewhere. I thought that was you. You can have credit for it.
Yeah, it was. It was.
Definitely.
I'll
Maybe that
take it.
was Coggan. I don't know. Maybe that was Coggan or Astron that said that. I don't remember now.
It's a gem. It could be either for sure. It could be either for sure. Yeah. Yeah. So this was my other one where I suspect that I am tunneling a lot, and I have some. Yeah, we have some tips, some exercise at the end that maybe will help me work through that. But we can get there. I wanted to take a little detour, if that's all right, and just kind of take a step back and talk about player kind of psychographics and types of players for a moment. um, so yeah, we may revisit this in a larger episode at some point. I'm not sure, but just to kind of give some perspective, folks are going to be very familiar, especially folks who've come from an MTG background, of the player psychographics and possibly even the player aesthetic profiles that get referenced there. So I'm talking about the like Johnny slash Jenny, Timmy, Tammy, and Spikes. Those three camps, and then the aesthetic profiles may be less relevant, but those are the Porthos and Melvins of the world, and these are kind of different kind of profiles. But I think that understanding what you enjoy about the game you're playing is also a good piece of awareness, a good thing to have in your tool belt when you're trying to build awareness for when you might be tunneling, and that can help you identify times when you should be adapting your play. So, for example, I I consider myself to be a Johnny slash Spike. Okay, so Spikes get maligned as the cutthroat players. In reality, Spikes are mostly defined by, I believe, it's been a little while since I've dug super deep into this, but mostly defined by a drive to kind of demonstrate a mastery of the game that they're playing. So in a TCG or in a like market-driven setting, yeah, that could be, a hallmark. A hallmark of that could be seeking out and spending lots of money on cards. But I would also argue, quick draw, that adaptive is one of the spikier formats that exist in Keyforge today, even though it might not be one that you typically think of it. But and then the Johnny side, these are players who are looking to demonstrate their creativity. Players looking to demonstrate their creativity, and these get labeled the combo players of the game, right? So I am very much a person who likes to demonstrate their creativity through Keyforge, right, when I'm playing the game. I do like demonstrating mastery as well. That's a big part of who I am as a player. But when I sit down to play a game and I pull up Zyger, like I have a much better time playing that deck when I do the Gravitron animator transporter platform thing than when I like spam a bunch of dudes and reap. Like I will do it. And my spikiness particularly comes out in deck selection, right? Like if I was just that Johnny, I would play Zyger every event all the time, or something similar. But my like desire to demonstrate mastery comes through more strongly in the deck selection piece. Um, but it affects me a lot during gameplay, right? Like I'll see a cool thing that I could do, and I'm like, I'm gonna make this work, and like it's gonna be awesome. Like that thing shines really strongly and can be a thing that leads me down like these tunneling paths.
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with the psychographic profiles. It's been a while since I've read about the ones too, as defined by, I think, as popularized in Magic. But then we had Hiram Graph on episode 82,
Mhm.
referencing a lot of the player suits, as they were called. And those ones there were clubs, hearts, spades, diamonds, clubs being killers, hearts being socializers, spades being explorers, diamonds being achievers. Can you apply those to this concept as well?
A little bit. So I think you might, and it's interesting too because there's also this other question of like, okay, so what? Like if I am here as a socializer and I'm tunneling, okay, maybe I don't mind, right? Maybe I don't mind so much. But I think everybody, in truth, has a mix of these components to them. So I think to me, clubs very most closely maps to spikes, right? They're looking to beat you up, win the game, and take the money, right? So there's a little bit of club in me, a little bit of spades and diamonds for sure. So I love the exploration, and sometimes that spade-ness, that exploration tendency, grabs my focus, and the club side of me loses out because of it. I don't know if I can. I don't know if I can map it so closely to hearts and diamonds. Diamonds may be a better map to spikes even than clubs. Diamonds being the people who are looking to achieve things, but I see that as more like top of leaderboard.
Would that be like a combo player as well, like a Johnny?
I think they fall more in the spades camp, but
Okay.
I guess it's tricky because the psychographic profiles, right? And yeah, we're getting a little bit deep into it here, but are really trying to get into why you enjoy the game as opposed to like how you behave inside in the game. I don't know if that makes sense as a
Mhm.
distinction. This would be a good one to dig into. We might have to bring Hiram Graph back on. Um, so
Well,
I'm gonna
I mean,
say
any of
yes.
these profiles, they're not perfect. Like, you're not going to be just squarely in one camp, right? Like,
Yeah.
everyone's gonna be overlapping a couple of them, maybe some more than others, but yeah, they're not perfect. So yeah, and they are interesting to think about. And I think what you're referring to here, it goes back to the affinity sort of thing. Like, what kind of player, like what do you enjoy about the game, and therefore, like, what kind of decks do you want to play? What kind of strategies do you want to follow? And so yeah, I can see that relating to the affinity side and the tunneling aspect of this as well.
And this all plays in, right, into kind of the like, well, how do I adapt or how do I recognize that I should adapt? And a lot of that comes back to awareness first, right? Being aware of when you are tunneling or when you're in a situation where you really do need to adapt. And it can help with that to recognize, some of your motivating, some of what motivates you about the game. And you may come to a point too where you say, yeah, I probably am, but I don't mind. Which is fine, which is totally like a valid way to approach the game. But I think always having some awareness is never a bad thing.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Why don't you talk about the artwork that you shared on stream at the start of this one, and how that relates to this? That's a masterpiece, by the way. Have to put that in the show notes.
I'll put it in the show notes. So this may be actually a good segue into some of the exercises for improving your awareness that can help you recognize situations where you should adapt, where you might be tunneling. And one of the notes that I put on our card here for planning was overcoming local maxima. This isn't biggest dude at your LGS. This is a term from, I guess, optimization theory. You will at times, as you're trying to optimize something, come to a point where you look left and the path left leads down, and you look right and the path right leads down, and you say, I'm at the top. Like this is the best, this is as good as it can get. That may be a result of perspective as opposed to reality, right? So I made this little doodle, which folks, you can check out the show notes. And I sent QuickDraw the little snapshot of this little doodle that shows him. This is you, QuickDraw.
Of course it is.
I don't know if you could tell, standing on the top of a little hill. Yeah,
Yeah.
and the height marker is 2,000 feet, and he's like, "Yeah, I made it." And then if you pan out, you see that there's a saddle. It dips down, then rises up to a majestic height of 3,457 feet.
I thought your daughter made this. Did you steal this from her? Are you taking credit for it?
just like, your tunnel and lights metaphor. Just take all the credit.
That's what we do here. We just steal the content and rebrand
Mhm.
it as Sloppy, and then here we
Mhm.
are.
Totally. So yeah, there's a lot of thinking that goes into how you can overcome situations like this in optimization theory. But when you're playing a game, you may not have time or care for a lot of those things, but you still may want to overcome it when you find yourself on a smaller peak. And I have some exercises, some that I do often. You've probably seen me do this before, but I very intentionally, not always, but have in the past play decks with self-imposed restrictions or with the intent to play it differently than I have in the past, right? So, a good example, when Winds of Exchange first came out, I had this strange shell deck that I was like, this is a cool deck. There are things that I can probably do this deck. There's hidden potential tap somewhere. And I played it a few times and I was like, all right, I have a good sense for what the deck can do when I play it like this. And I went into some other games and just like, whatever I do, I don't care, but I'm not playing the deck the way that I was before. And I think you even like came in and spectated one and you were like,
I
why the
did.
heck are you not taking these shells back or something like that? And I was
I
like,
was
yeah,
so I was so mad at you. I came into that game and I was like, "What the heck are you doing? Like, this is a terrible play. Like, JT, what's going on?" You're just like, "Oh, I'm just messing around, just trying to learn." And that was really eye-opening for me. Like, it's a really cool way to practice though, to like impose that restriction on yourself to say like, "Yeah, let's see what happens if I do this kind of weird off the wall play. Like, how does my deck respond to that?" You can learn a lot from that, not just like a new way to play the deck, but like it just kind of opens up other scenarios. So I really love this approach to playing practice games to do things differently, not just like doing the same thing you've done 50 other times before. Because doing the same thing over and over again, you're not going to learn as much. Trying to do
mhm,
things differently, try something off the wall that your teammate will join the game and be like, "What the heck are you doing?" Like those are the kind of situations where you can learn about the deck a bit more and kind of learn about some of the things it's capable of.
totally. And my machine learning and AI nerds in the audience will recognize what I'm talking about a little bit here, where I'm drawing some inspiration from. As you're training like a new model, right? It's very important to force it to explore. Otherwise, it will only take advantage of the knowledge that it has. And you're just going to kind of get stuck in these kind of local maxima, right? So you've got to say, no, no, now you do a random thing and see where it lands you. Putting in that forced exploration is critical to like overcoming some of these situations. And kind of the takeaway there is if you only ever follow the paths that you've always taken, those will be the extent of your experiences, and you will have less ability to draw on a wide range of experience when you met with a novel situation. So you're going to see a beast from the second peak at some point, and if you've only ever played on this first peak, you're going to be like, what the heck's going on?
The kind of practice match is great example of learning something different so that you're not tunneling on that same strategy you always do, being able to change your strategy to something else that might seem off the wall, but at least you know what kind of value you can get from it. So that if your plan A is not going to work, you might be able to recognize that sooner and switch over to plan B.
Yeah. So that's one of the exercises you can do to improve your awareness and kind of also build up some of your breadth of experience with decks, right? Force yourself to go down different pathways when you're in a practice setting, and you'll have kind of more varied experience to draw from
Mm.
in the actual game. And not just that, but having that breadth of experience will help you avoid tunneling, will help you kind of like recognize when there are other options, or just kind of like help you break out of some of these kind of ruts of repetition. Yeah.
Hmm. All right, hit me with another exercise. You got a few other things that you like to do.
Yeah. So another one that we actually do decently well already, I think, is sort of post game analysis. So if you are looking to improve and you've got teammates who are willing, like encourage them to like watch some of your games, give you notes afterwards, or even just your opponent. This is great too. If you chat with your opponent after the game and you're like, oh, I was super worried about X, Y, or Z, and you never drew it. And they're like, oh yeah, I wasn't even like wasn't even on my radar. That's an opportunity for you both to talk through which one of us was, ignoring the elephant in the room on the game plan. There have definitely been situations where my opponent's like, yeah, I was really trying to avoid this play. And I was like, yeah, it wasn't even on my radar. It wasn't even on my radar. I'm
Yeah.
not saying that I was right or they were right. Just interesting that we were both kind of fixating on different things. Very often, you or Not Tonight or whoever is watching a game will say, I was wondering if you were going to do X, Y, or Z, and it may not have even been something that I was considering. So
Hmm.
having those notes, getting those input from different folks who just get to zoom out. Like the spectator sees everything. That's what you always hear, right? So you may miss things, but having folks to sit on your shoulder after the game can be really useful.
I would actually say spectator does not see everything. As I was going to actually point out that your idea of talking to your opponent after the game, asking them about certain things, can be more useful because the spectator and you are not able to see how certain types of disruption, for example, may have affected your opponent. One
Hmm.
example, something that I like to ask my opponents about all the time when I'm playing an Ulfbert device deck is how bad did you feel like the Ulfbert device like hindered you that game? Because so many times I'm still trying to learn like, is this a card that I should be leaning into, or is this something that does my deck play well into this? And one of the only ways you can know that is to kind of feel how difficult it was for you, how restraining it was for you, but also ask your opponent, did that hurt you in any way? Like, did that really like set you back? And an observer, a spectator in the game is not going to quite know that because they can't see the hand. They can't tell what kind of awkward plays that it kind of encouraged. So like talking to your opponent, sharing post game notes is, I think, a tremendous way of learning as well, and kind of just picking their brain about you know um, things that they had seen or didn't see as well.
There are three different perspectives here, and they're all valuable for learning after a game in a post match analysis, right? There's you have the information of what was on board and what was in your hand. Your opponent has the information what was on board in their hand, and that's going to give them a different perspective. They'll have a different perspective that they can bring to the analysis. And then this is quick draw why I, as a commentator and as a person consuming commentary, like it when the commentators can't see what's in players' hands. Very often you are like your perspective is broadened because you have to consider what might be there rather than fixating on what is there, right? As you're thinking through what their options are and where the game might go after this turn, right? So
Hmm.
if you're looking just at what there's isn't in this person's hand right now, you might focus in on, well, what's the most amber they can get or what have you. But it's not always even the best turn, right? Just to kind of maximize your amber on this one turn. If you're thinking long game, you may get some insights from a commentator who can't see what's in your hand as they're kind of like talking through what you ought to be thinking about 2 or 3 turns down the line.
Yeah, and that we talked last week about, well, not last week, but in last season I think it was, about planning and looking at your turns and planning out your turn at the very beginning. And sometimes you might do that and think like, okay, this way gets me 5 amber, this way gets me 4 amber, therefore the 5 amber is the better option. There's more to it than that, obviously. So like, sometimes it could be the better play could be not going for as much amber, but setting up the board depending on what your opponent's doing and what your game plan is.
Totally. It comes back to, well, we're going to reference our first episode of this season, thinking through the game in terms of turns, as in terms of, how am I going to phrase this? As a whole instead of individual turns, right? You can think about maximizing an individual turn, and that will give you one possible answer for what you should do this turn. But if you're thinking about the game as a whole and where you need to be at the end of 3 turns, it may give you a completely different answer. That kind of leads me into the last sort of exercise. And this is something that you'll hear a number of strong players throughout the community say often, which is slow down, insert pauses into your play, right? So take a moment at the start of your turn to think things through before you make your house call. Know where you want to end up at the end of your turn, right? Especially if there is no random elements, right? You're not playing any wormholes. You could be able to say, what's my amber? What's the board going to be like at the end of the turn? It's very easy to just make a house call, yeah, YOLO it, and then try and follow your nose through a sequence of actions. When really the house call is probably the last thing that you should determine after you've considered what your options are.
Hmm.
So yeah, slowing things down, thinking through your options is a very important thing. And I'm going to reference a sort of adage from the chess world here, which is once you've found a good play, like a good move, pause and like look for the better one. Because it's very easy to say, oh, here's a turn. It's going to get me to check. It's going to kill these 3 dudes or whatever. Awesome. Let's go do it. You can bank that and then see if there are any better options.
Mm.
This actually helped me a lot when thinking through how I play Tritrix, trying trying to make this the Blom of Tritrix. Um, I have a very, very hard time visualizing witch queen combo turns through to completion
Mm.
and being able to say like very confidently, okay, this is my amber total. This is what the board's going to be. This is what's in archive. This is when it's in discard. Especially when like very being off by one for Chota it matters a lot. So it's not just like I'm going to make a ton of amber. Like no, I need to know if I'm making 14 or 13 because that's two keys versus one key and a change. And I think for this deck, recognizing or one of the things that's helped me search for better turns once I've identified a good turn is just some heuristics for what the like conceptual max is with how things will play out. And I can usually say like, okay, I should be able to find something that makes 8 or 14. And if I can find it, great. But there are going to be times where I say, no, I only see one that's going to be 7. Maybe the conceptual max is not achievable, but it at least gives me a nudge to think past when I find 7, but believe there should be an 8.
I don't know the lines in Blom as well as you do, or in Tritrix, I should say. Do you have situations where, you might think like, okay, like here's this one play I can do to get 13 amber, but I'll be one short of winning. And does it end up actually being better to just stop at 7 to hold your combo pieces for the next turn to make sure that you can do that next turn?
100%. There are definitely and that changes your sequencing early on, right? I want to end with maybe the witching hour in hand as
Hmm.
opposed to and 3 fewer amber as opposed to a rule of 6 witch of the eye, but like no recursion for the following turn and a few
Yeah.
extra amber, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
very interesting. So it's like the best turn sometimes is not just the one that's like maybe even checking for key three. Like dare I say, like you always be checking, but there it sounds like there could be situations where checking for key three is a worse play than just holding the combo pieces to make sure that you can do it again the next turn.
Yep. Yep.
Interesting.
Totally. So yeah, it's been an interesting one to explore. Interesting one to explore. I'm trying to like find the value in it when it's not just cheeky combos.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was going to ask earlier, like not just this deck specifically, but any deck really. Like for decks that feel or look one dimensional, like they have this one thing they do. There's always something else that you can do better with it if that one thing is not going to work out, right? Whether that is just trying to play cards and dig and play pips, or maybe that's just setting up a board in one house and just reaping. Like even for decks that appear to be so one dimensional, like you still have options, right? Like there's probably not a single Keyforge deck that has plan A and then plan B is lose, right? There's always something else you can try to do to maximize your chances, right? Would you agree?
Oh, totally. One of the things that I like most about the game, or what drew me to it initially is, making use of those, making those plan Bs work is one of the like beautiful things about Keyforge. Absolutely.
I do like that chess adage a lot because there's been a lot of times where I start planning my turn, I see something that looks pretty good, and I'm just like, that seems good enough. That's all I'm asking for this turn, and you move on. But you're right, like taking a minute to pause, and there might be something even better out there, and don't just stop and find like, yeah, this is good enough for me for now. Like there could be something even better.
It's tricky, and at the risk of boring everybody to tears, like this was a thing that I thought a lot about as we were when way back when we were like, let's make an AI to play Keyforge,
Hmm.
and the the space of options that you can explore is gigantic, especially when you're like, oh, I'm gonna play I don't know, not finished with you, and now I have like 2 to the however many creatures are on my discard pile ways that I can shuffle things back in. It's like, all right, we need some heuristics to like trim down the decision space. Gets unwieldy quickly. But yeah, looking for that better play is a great habit to be in. And where was I going with that? I was going with that. It's interesting, like how people decide to stop searching, right? Like as a computer, you're like, I can say, oh, take 30 minutes max. Just look as far and deep as you can, and whatever the best plan is that you come up with in that time, we'll go with it. As a
Hmm.
human, it's tricky because you're searching for other options. I'm sitting there with Tritrix trying to figure out how to turn this like pile of witches into 14 amber. You're sweating it out, waiting waiting for your opponent to be like, is this slow play yet?
Yeah.
So it's tough.
Yeah, in a game with a clock, you eventually need to just make the decision and accept that your limitations of the human mind. can only get you
Mm,
so far, and so you got to just make the call that you think is best.
yeah. It's not for this evening, but there's an interesting, yeah, kind of social experiment in there too.
Hmm.
Yeah. Have you ever called the judge to check from somebody for slow play? As an aside here,
Not in KeyForge. In other games, yes, I have.
I have the same answer. Interestingly enough.
Hmm.
Interestingly enough. Well, cool. That was good. I don't know if I have many other notes to jump to.
I think you hit everything that was laid out. It's a lot to think about. I think the big takeaways for me would be the signs you might be tunneling, and then the exercises to kind of improve your awareness, and just in general at a higher level, like ensuring that you have enough empathy to avoid tunneling. Those kind of things, I think, are a really good starting point for trying to become a better player and not tunneling as much on a certain game plan that's going to be losing for you.
Right on. Well then, with that having been said, no, did I say subjunctive before? I think I meant past participle. I don't know.
I
We'll
think
get
you
the
said
grammar
both.
nerds. Oh, did I? All right.
You're
Well,
just covering your bases.
covering my bases. It's been so long since I've studied that stuff, but there was a while. I took like 7 years. I studied like 7 years of Latin, all the poetry and stuff, and like got really more deep into Latin grammar than English grammar. Interestingly enough.
I think it's total sidebar, but I think that's kind of normal. It's like a second language, you learn more about like the mechanics of the grammar. Like when you're a second grader, you're not learning about like the
Yeah.
intricate differences of like conjugating verbs and like it's kind of second nature at that point. And maybe this is just an English thing, but when you're learning foreign languages, then you are more focused on the mechanics of it because you're kind of trying to relearn something, and you have to
Mm-hmm.
sort of unlearn what you have learned in your native language. So yeah, I didn't even know what the subjunctive was until I took a foreign language.
There you go. The more you know. The more you know. And speaking of things that we know, that segue has nothing to do with our sponsor, but that's where we're headed. Uh,
Nice
but
try.
yeah, but our deck up on stream, Still Blom of Tritrix, does have things to do with our sponsor. So this episode of Bottom of the Beaker was brought to you by Witch Queen, the must-have app for every chess player. Look, we've all been there. You're in the heat of the game, savoring the long-awaited pawn promotion, and oops, you grab your opponent's queen by mistake. Well, fear not. Witch Queen's real-time alerts and sleek interface let you focus on winning and not worry about silly missteps. So next time you navigate a pawn through the perilous wilds, be confident you've got the right piece with Witch Queen. Has that ever happened to you, Quick Draw? You're
Oh
playing a
yeah. Oh
speed
man.
chess match and
Well, I'm terrible at speed chess, but in slow chess, that's happened to me.
has
um,
it?
no, not specifically, but I could have used Witch Queen to make some better moves in general in my early chess career. I might still be playing chess right now had I had Witch
Mm,
Queen.
there you go. Now you know. Now you know. Someone out there is like, "Hey, that's a great idea." Although it's funny too. I was watching, I forget what it was, some speed chess championship over the board, not online. And you get to the end, and there's like a time scramble, and there's like pieces flying everywhere, and like someone's about to promote a pawn, and they like have the piece ready to go to like swap it in. And it's like, and what if somebody grabbed the wrong queen? I don't know.
Hmm.
Anyway, this is not the chess podcast, but an ultimate fake out. If you go to do a promotion and you have like the queen in your hand, you're like ready to slam it down, and then you swap it for the knight at the last minute. Like, gotcha. I don't know.
That would be
Under
very
promote
rare that
flex.
that would be the right move.
We digress, have digressed further than we normally digress. And folks, I want to also let you know that Bottom of the Beaker is recorded live Wednesday evening at 9:30 Eastern Time, right here at twitch.tv/sloppylabwork. You can find recordings of our past shows and other streams over at youtube.com. We are at Sloppy Labwork over there. And for the very best content, 34? No, 57 times distilled and scraped from the bottom of the beaker. Search for that very phrase in your podcatcher of choice, and we'll be there with only eyes for you. Thanks so much as always. Quick Draw, any words for the folks getting off at the final audio stop?
Well, I am tunneling on my catchphrase and have nothing else to say, so I will just tell everyone to stay sloppy.